So go ahead. It's all yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica. And Jessica, by the way, at the very end of all this, will be taking questions. So anywhere along the way you feel, oh, I want to ask this question or that question, I won't get to it probably until toward the last 15 minutes or so, but the intent is for me to get to it. I don't know if we can get to all the questions or not, but certainly I will try. Now, my name is Steve Dale. I'm a certified animal behavior consultant. I speak at veterinary conferences around the world. I contribute to books about pets, books for pet parents, as well as veterinary textbooks and such. I host several different radio shows as well, and apparently host a podcast every now and again, like this one. And I want to go around the room and introduce folks, just frankly, in the order of which they're here on my official sheet of paper. And I'm going to start off with Dr. Tom Butera, mostly because that way, you know who's in the room. Dr. Butera, raise your hand so people know it's you. Currently the CEO of Enlighten Veterinary and has more than 40 years of experience in academic and private small animal equine clinical practice. Dr. Butera has an extensive work in both business development and management of veterinary hospitals as a co-founder and board member and chief medical officer of Pet Partners, which owned and operated 68 small animal veterinary hospitals in 32 states. Since 2016, he has been actively involved in business development with Mars Veterinary Health before joining Volition Veterinary in 2021. Dr. Rebba Timmons. She's over there. She is the research director for Volition Veterinary, helps to guide and manage their research department and various research studies. She has a research background in microbiology, assay development, veterinary clinical studies, and nanotechnology, whatever that is. She is also a relief veterinarian with the substitute veterinarian. Good name for such a thing. Helps out clinics in general practice and sees dogs, cats, and sometimes exotic pets. Tanya Cooper. Tanya is the director of veterinary marketing at Base Paws, a Zoetis company, specializing in pet genetics. She is an MBA graduate of Texas A&M and has nearly 20 years of experience in animal health, working for Zoetis, Seva Animal Health, and Merck Animal Health. She is a feline advocate, has been touched by canine cancer, as I bet most of us have, even personally, veterinarians or not. I mean, dogs don't care. Cancer doesn't care if you're a veterinary professional. She's lost 2 of her greyhounds to osteosarcoma. David Stansfield.
Yeah.
He is a graduate of Liverpool University, as you will tell when you hear him. College of Veterinary Medicine, following 5 years in general practice. He spent several years in diagnostic pathology and extension advisory work. From here, he joined the pharmaceutical industry and focused on medical education of specialists in private practice and in universities with new and emerging pharmaceuticals, including Palladia. Okay, the first, I know how to say that. I know that drug. I think that's what I meant to say if I didn't. The first FDA-approved drug for the treatment of mast cell cancers, a very important pharmaceutical. Nina Papzian. There she is. She spent over 30 years in clinical social work experience, including specialization in veterinary social work. Nina is a pet loss grief specialist. Did you know there is such a thing? Certified by the Association of Pet Loss and Bereavement. She is also the host for the Association of Pet Loss Bereavement chat room and is a certified bereavement care provider. She is in private practice in Ontario, Canada. And Trisha Montgomery, she is the person behind this all. I saved her for last because she's last on this sheet, but there's another reason for that too. She is the vision behind Moose's March, the reason in part why we are doing what we are doing tonight. Moose's March is a 501(c) organization dedicated to making early detection of pet cancer accessible to everyone, regardless of gender, race, or income level. With over 25 years in veterinary, animal welfare, and pet industries, she is committed to creating a future where early detection of pet cancer, which is what we are greatly going to focus on tonight, incidentally. We'll talk about a lot of things concerning pet cancers, dogs in particular, but early detection at the top of the list. And we have some news for you, by the way, coming up. And in fact, I will begin here, my old and dear friend. Why are we here? Who was Moose? I describe what Moose's March is, but how did what happened to Moose then transform into Moose's March?
Thank you, Steve. An honor to be with you all and on this panel. And when we started creating this, I thought there was no one better than you that I wanted by our side, my side for this. So thank you for doing this for us. Moose was my pit bull who passed away of stage 4 lymphoma, May of 2022. He was my heart, my glue. He was heartworm positive. I had adopted him from Paws Humane Society, smack dab at the start of the pandemic, and he never left my side. It was a very sudden loss for me, and it was something that was devastating. And through my grief and my sadness came Moose's March, and so really turned that sadness into a legacy for him, and focusing on early detection of pet cancer and helping those educate and learn more about pet cancer.
All right, and that's what we're going to do tonight. I'm not going to bury the lead. Dr. Butera, I want to start with you. This is exciting news. A new test that is available, a new tool for veterinary professionals that pet parents, if you don't know about it, and you probably don't, it's new, you will now. Tell us about it.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks again, everyone, for being animal advocates here this evening. I'm sure we've all had the experience with pet cancer loss, including myself, with 2 golden retrievers in our family, so 2 lymphoma. But yes, we are excited. We're very excited about introducing the test called Nu-Q Vet Cancer Test, which is a simple blood sample that can be taken on your dog at the time of your annual physical exam during their health wellness exams. It's specifically meant to be done on dogs that are 7 years of age or older, and also predisposed breeds, like the 2 that Trisha had one, of course. We've had a couple, and others have had as well. Golden retrievers, German shepherds, the like, are all predisposed to it. The test can be very easily run with a simple sample test. As I said, it's done at your veterinarian's office. It's sent off to the reference lab the next day, and then the results usually come back within 24 to 48 hours. Interestingly enough, about 92% of the dogs that we do take samples on come back in the low risk range, which is fortunate. But unfortunately, 6 to 8% of them come back in a high range, in a high suspicious range. So this is a screening test. It's very similar to what men and women go in for prostate exams on an annual exam or breast cancer. We're trying to pick up detection of a particular biomarker, which are called nucleosomes. It's really a DNA extract, which goes in the blood and it circulates in the blood, and we're able to pick it up in our test. And by doing that, we're able to give an indication that maybe this is circulating in the bloodstream before the animal is actually showing clinical symptoms. In other words, before they're showing enlarged lymph nodes, before they're sick, before they're having any sort of GI disturbances. That's the key. The key is to detect early, and that's why we're here this evening to talk about it. And this very simple, very affordable test that can be run in any one of your veterinarian's offices, that the blood sample can be taken and sent off to a reference lab such as IDEXX or HESCA. Samples can get back. It's meant to be, and please remember this, it's meant to be a peace of mind test, so that you know that your animals have a peace of mind, that your animals are healthy at the time. And that's really meant to be a very positive message for you. But if we can detect early, then hopefully we can extend the lives of these pets that are so dear to us for much longer periods of time, and also extend that human-animal bond, which is so precious to us.
I'm going to stick with you for a little while. What's the difference between a screening test and a diagnostic test?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. When you have a diagnostic test, you basically can identify the cancer. that you're talking, or you're using a test to specifically identify the cancer. Our test, where it's a screening test, will pick up circulating biomarkers in the bloodstream, but it will not tell you which cancer it is or what cancer it is. So after you take our test and alerts the veterinarian that these biomarkers are circulating, then the veterinarian at that point in time will go into a diagnostic protocol where they will do x-rays, blood work, CT scans, and this type of thing, where they really go in and try to identify what that cancer is. So this gives you the heads up that something's wrong, and that's the time to start going and looking for it diagnostically.
Are you predominantly looking for two types of cancers in particular, even though you may pick up others?
Yeah. Our test is what we call a liquid biopsy test, which really means a blood sample, very small amount of blood. And our test, because it's circulating DNA in the bloodstream, we have a very high predisposition to detecting early two diseases in particular that unfortunately affect many of us, in terms of our dogs that we own. And the two of them are lymphoma, and the other one is hemangiosarcoma. With reference to lymphoma, our detection rate is close to 77%, and our detection rate with hemangiosarcoma is close to 82%. So those two metastatic diseases we pick up pretty well. Then there are 6 or 7 other cancers that we have worked on: carcinomas, mast cell tumors, other cancers, where we have about a 50% detection rate, which is quite similar to what it is on the human side in terms of sequencing when you take them all together. But lymphoma and hemangiosarcoma make up close to 35% of what we see as veterinarians. And unfortunately, there's too many stories out there about us losing pets to those particular diseases. So that's why this test is so important to be incorporated into your annual screening test.
Yeah, and I could add one more thing to that. Oftentimes, those types of cancers, as well as others, aren't picked up until it's too late to do anything about it, which I'll circle back to. You alluded to, and I want to ask Tanya about this, genetics. It seems as though, based on several different sources, anecdote is one, which is how it all began, the Morris Animal Foundation Lifetime Study, and other various specific studies that I'm sure this group knows about. Everyone else, take my word for it. It seems as though certain types of cancers do have a genetic predisposition. You mentioned osteosarcoma with your own dogs. And when you bring a greyhound into a veterinary clinic, many greyhound owners know this. It is predictable that it's a possibility that that dog may have osteosarcoma. It is predictable now that, sadly, oftentimes in 3-year-old dogs and golden retrievers, we're seeing hemangiosarcoma, and on and on and on. Can you talk about what's genetic, to the best of your ability, what's genetic and what isn't, and how medicine is changing in that individual predictive care, if you will, is looking at the breed of that dog?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So we're still, research is still linking specific genetic mutations to disease. So we know for not necessarily a cancer, but we do know specifically that we've been able to identify specific mutations like PKD is associated with polycystic kidney disease in cats. So we're still learning more and more about specific mutations within DNA that are associated with clinical disease. Cancer, in a lot of cases, is very complex. And I think Becca will talk a little bit about epigenetics, where it's not just the DNA that the animal is born with, but it's a combination of factors like their DNA, but also their environment, their lifestyle, a lot of different factors that go into what could potentially cause cancers in pets. But the benefit of doing genetic testing in pets is that you are able to identify not only a breed, which can reveal information to veterinarians on what previous predisposition certain breeds may have for disease, genetic or non-genetic related, but also genetic testing can reveal if there are any specific genetic mutations that put an animal at elevated risk for potential comorbidities. So if a pet is at risk for cancer and it also has a genetic high risk for, let's say, a bleeding disorder, then that may affect the way that veterinarians then evaluate their treatments or their protocols. So it's really important to be able to look at these things and understand more about the pet. And that's where we can start getting into these personalized care plans that veterinarians can make based on the medical history, based on breed predispositions, based on unique genetic markers that each individual pet has, instead of just assuming that all breeds will have these conditions. So it's really fascinating area of study, and Baseball is really happy to be able to help vets do that.
Yeah, Basepaws has been on the cutting edge of this stuff for cats as well as dogs for a long time. Dr. Timmons, I want you to pick up on that answer and kind of add on to what was just said, beginning, though, with what the heck is epigenetics?
Man, what a complicated subject. Epigenetics in of itself is really just, it's kind of studying how different genes, behaviors, environment, anything that can affect how the genes work. And so I think, Tanya said it very well of, we know right now that especially as a veterinarian in the clinic, we know there are certain breeds, and even as you said, that are predisposed to certain types of cancers, and just to kind of be more in the aware of our back of our brain, and that they are predisposed to certain types of cancers. I know you mentioned greyhounds and osteosarcoma, certainly golden retrievers, lymphoma. And then as Tanya mentioned, certain cats more prone to definitely like kidney disease. And the way I tried to describe it too, as we, looking at genes of themselves is, and looking at why we're trying to look at these genetic mutations, kind of like how some women get tested for like the BRCA gene and things like that, is that not everyone necessarily carries these mutations, but the goal is to try to figure out what kind of what mutations are out there that can affect these certain types of cancers. And we do know that definitely these are likely more prevalent in certain breeds. And as Tanya said, it's very likely that they're not necessarily there in all the breeds.
Dr. Stansfield, as a are you a veterinary oncologist? I'm not sure myself, so I want to make sure I'm asking.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so but you do see cancer patients. That's why you're here. So do you, when someone walks into your clinic with a mixed breed dog that is truly a Heinz 157, do you then say, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to consider? Or when someone comes in with I don't want to pick on golden retrievers, but they've been brought up a couple of times, a golden retriever puppy, do you then notify the pet parent, okay, watch for these things?
So, Steve, I'm probably not the right person to ask this question because it's some years since I've been in practice. So I'm more on the medical education side of the veterinary profession, working with specialists.
Okay, so same question. When you teach specialists or work with specialists, same question.
So, yeah, I think what where I'm coming from with this particular seminar that we're running here is we're talking about the collaborative care, the importance of collaborative care in managing these dogs that are potentially more susceptible to oncological disorders. And by that, I'm talking about the triad of care, which is the pet owner, the general practitioner, and the oncologist in specialty practice. Some veterinarians specialize in oncology. When I was in practice, I specialized in dermatology, so very rarely referred anything to a dermatologist. Some vet GPs will specialize in oncology too, and may treat these cases or diagnose or look for possible increased susceptibilities themselves. but many will refer them to the specialty oncologist who's in specialty practice or working at one of the universities. And it's that triad of care that I think is important for the pet owner to understand. And that's where we come from with the Collaborative Care Coalition, of which I'm a board member, is we're trying to make everyone aware of the triad of care that exists in order to best prevent and manage oncological diseases in our furry pets.
So, back to you, Dr. Butera. Hemangiosarcoma is one of the cancers that you can screen for with the newer screening test. But then what? It's one of those cancers. What do you automatically go into surgery? Do you automatically, as to what Dr. Stansfield said, say, see a veterinary oncologist for the next step? Because it's not the kind of cancer where you could say, we're going, and you know what? I think you have to describe what hemangiosarcoma is in order so everyone understands to best answer that question.
Yeah, Steve, it's a blood-borne cancer that affects the immune system tremendously, and unfortunately has a tremendous affinity for going to the spleen in particular, but also can affect many of the organs in the body. And unfortunately, when frequently we see it in the spleen, it's already metastasized, which means spread to other organs in the body, the liver, the kidneys, sometimes even into the bone marrow. It's an awful disease. It's an absolutely awful disease. The interesting thing about hemangiosarcoma, and the original question that you asked me, with reference to screening, and remember for our audience, when we're screening and we're talking specifically about our test, which is this new Q cancer screening test, we are doing it on healthy animals. So for that reason, they are not showing clinical symptoms of being sick when they're presented to us.
But with hemangiosarcoma,
But with hemangiosarcoma, if in fact it's a quiet disease and it comes on acutely in terms of its presentation to the doctor. So a dog that, to use where you're going with this, a dog that looked perfectly fine a week ago and potentially came in, if we had the opportunity to potentially test that dog or screening, we probably would have picked up that something is erroneous in that bloodstream, something's going on. Unfortunately, with hemangiosarcoma, because it can have such an acute and aggressive onset, they frequently present to us when they are terribly ill. And consequently, they're what we call cachectic, they're in terrible state. They have a swollen abdomen, which is where the spleen is. They potentially have bled from the spleen into the abdomen, not to get graphic, but these dogs are tremendously ill. And frequently, when they are presented with what we call hemoabdomen, meaning blood in the abdomen, and it's coming from this and potentially coming from the spleen, they are a surgical risk immediately. And then we need to go in surgically and try to see if we can recover them, which if they've gone that far, frequently even taking the spleen out and then treating the hemoabdomen and trying to get all that blood and foreign toxic material out, these dogs usually have a very strong death sentence. It's very difficult to recover from them. So it's a terrible disease. The thing about screening, and also, but they do shed early on. Our test has the ability to pick them up in the stage 1s and the stage 2s, where we can see them earlier before they get into the stage 3, which is what I'm talking about when you have this terrible disease presented to these veterinarians where surgery is the only option left at that point in time. We're trying to get to it before that, so hopefully we can get to them before they get to that stage.
But my additional question would be, did someone else want to chime in there? Did I hear another voice? Okay, so my question would be, all right, you identify in a perfectly healthy dog that the dog isn't as healthy as it seems, that this is going on in the 3-year-old golden retriever, not unheard of, actually. Right. What would you do? I mean, are you going to recommend a veterinary, to Dr. What Stansfield said, to see tomorrow a veterinary oncologist? Are you going to then suggest that the oncologist, you can't speak for, but what would be the next step? Would surgery be automatically the next step? And if so, is the prognosis really any different, even if you discovered it early for this particular kind of cancer? Now, the other kind of cancer, canine lymphoma, that you also frequently find, completely different set of circumstances, I believe. But for this kind of cancer,
it is. And some of the answers to your questions we have yet to find out. If in fact we can detect it early enough, which our test hopefully will do, the next step under that circumstance is probably usually an X-ray, an ultrasound, potentially CT scan, and we may see some development in the spleen with some what we call nodules. And those nodules could potentially be benign, meaning they're not cancerous, or they're cancerous. And consequently, there are many cases that are presented with what we call splenic nodules in these normal dogs that look perfectly normal. And then what we would do under that circumstance is we would go in, obviously, and try to take a biopsy and see if, in fact, where it's at. Our test hopefully will give an indication whether it's benign or malignant. But to your point, if we see it early and we see it on the ultrasound and we see it on an X-ray, but that dog is not clinically symptomatic, then obviously surgery, if we identify, surgery would certainly be an option, because what we're hoping for is that by removing the spleen, if it is localized to the spleen, that we don't have significant metastasis yet where it's affected other organs, which is a much more difficult outcome. So seeing it early, identifying that there's nodules, identifying that it is hemangiosarcoma, metastatic and not benign, can potentially and hopefully bring a situation more under control and hopefully give us an extension of life. We don't know how long, based on how bad it is, as opposed to the other case we're talking about comes in, that dog's actively ill, has an enlarged abdomen, has an enlarged spleen. We go in, we try to salvage it. Those animals, unfortunately, many times they pass on us within 2 to 3 days because the disease has gotten way in front of us.
Right. So, and it's increasingly common, this particular disease. Now, Dr. Stansfield, I'm here to tell you, veterinary medicine, in my view, which I do respect, is on occasion is the best bargain in medicine. If we're talking about the splenic surgery that Dr. Butera just mentioned, in an otherwise healthy dog, I don't know, it depends on geography. Let's say it's a specialist, might be, I'm taking a stab, $5,000 with additional treatment and follow-up and pain meds and all that. It's a lot of money. On the other hand, in human medicine, the same exact expertise, the same exact surgery, and the same exact pain medications would cost, what, $350,000. And oh my gosh, if you dare take a tissue in the hospital when you're there as a patient, as a human being, that's $500 for you taking a piece of Kleenex, right? You know, I mean, we've all seen that. Or an aspirin is $30 in the hospital. So I argue veterinary medicine is, and I want to come to you, Tricia, after this as well. I argue veterinary medicine is a bargain, but the reality is that what we're talking about is not affordable to everybody. So when some people go to see that cancer specialist and say, how do I do this financially? What is your comment or response to them? And what do you teach others to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, going back a step, I'm a big advocate of pet health insurance. And, you know, I'm a owner of one of the breeds that's very susceptible to osteosarcomas, Irish Wolfhounds. And we've always had health insurance for that. But if you don't have health insurance and you're there and you're faced with this $5,000 bill, there are companies that specialize in loans, a particular one called Care Credit, where you can get loans that can help you through this process. And also some specialist hospitals will also have programs where they can help self-finance you in these programs too. So there are options open to you. They always come with interest payments and so on, but they do enable you to get through that initial woof of how on earth do I afford this $5,000? Or if we're talking lymphomas, could be even more by the time you finish with all your treatment protocols.
Mm-hmm. And what you say is perfectly true and correct. And I'm glad you mentioned all that. Having said that, Tricia, not everyone can still even afford that. Not everyone can even afford to see a specialist necessarily in the real world. That's part of what Moose's March is all about. And I know you personally, it's part of what you're all about.
Yeah. It's very interesting because I remember when Moose was diagnosed with cancer, that he was gone within 2.5 weeks. He really was. And so there wasn't any options just because of where he was. But at Moose's March, what we're doing with the help of Volition Veterinary and some other amazing donors that are within our organization are giving back. And we're going to be providing 2 shelters, actually, early detection test and kits that we can detect cancer, and working with these areas. Also, along with that, people are going to be sharing their stories, and we're going to be helping those people out and having them go to our website, sharing those stories and seeing what we can do to help ease that financial burden. I also want to follow up on a couple of comments here that, when we think about a cancer diagnosis, relying on your veterinarians, relying on other people to help you through that, and friends and family, how important that is. And it's extremely, extremely important.
Well, that leads me, thank you very much, perfectly to Nina. So I haven't forgotten about you. So there you are in the exam room at your veterinary clinic. You haven't expected necessarily that diagnosis, or maybe you've thought about it because you know the breed you have and your greyhound is limping or whatever. And then you hear the word cancer. It's tough, and it doesn't matter how often veterinarians say things like chemotherapy, but your dog won't get as sick, because we've all known people who have gotten very, very sick. We've all known people. I don't think there's a person on this call watching who hasn't known, a family member or friend who hasn't had cancer. And for most, it's many people. The outcome isn't always great. So I don't think there's a more still, I know some have worked to change this, but devastating word. So do you have advice for people to deal with the emotion part of all this? Because our bond with our companion animals has never been more intense.
Well, I think this is all about the so-called C word. And as Dr. Butera used the expression death sentence earlier, I think, when pet guardians first are presented with a cancer diagnosis, there's typically a shock response, and they don't hear, it's not unusual to not hear or process anything that's communicated thereafter in that particular appointment. And there'll be a multitude of different trajectories for each pet guardian and their companion, depending on, their resource capacity, like financial resource, time resource, support resources. It's a little bit like when that diagnosis is presented, it's like a lightning strike to the pet guardian. And there is significant impact on an emotional level, social, cognitive, physiological, spiritual, and so on. So the profession of veterinary social work it's a new scope of practice, or newer scope of practice. And it is growing in the sense that there are more and more clinics and hospitals and specialists that have veterinary social workers on board as part of the team, adjuncts to the team. And we can always ask our clinic if there is someone on board who can assist us in terms of processing all of the myriad of aspects of a cancer diagnosis. And or if they can recommend someone for us to connect with. I'm a member of the Association of Pet Loss and Bereavement, and we have free access to chat support. There is a virtual support. There's different membership levels with the APLB, but that has been a hugely valuable forum for folks who are grieving the loss of a pet or in what we call anticipatory grief, which can get activated the moment a diagnosis is presented. Because, yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say there's the tendency, as if we were diagnosed or someone close to us, to once we're out of shock, to first visit catastrophic thinking, to go to worst case scenario. And part of that is our psyche's way of preparing us for worst case scenario.
I think that's true, and particularly with cancer. So I have a friend, a veterinary behaviorist, Dr. Lisa Radasta, who's brilliant, by the way. And she is now a caretaker for her older dog. And she's been posting a plug for her Instagram page, I suppose, but she's been posting on Instagram. I'm a veterinarian, I'm a behaviorist, and look, I'm going through the same thing. And being a caretaker means all sorts of things. I mean, your life is turned upside down. And it's not only finances, it's time. And it's time. And it's time. Because you have to be there to administer whatever it is, whatever that dog needs. Not to mention a feeling that I want you to talk about as well, of guilt. I know as a behavior consultant, I deal, separation anxiety. It's my fault. The dog slept in my bed. I did it. Well, people with dogs with cancer at a logical level, you didn't do it, but I assume guilt is a part of all this too. I threw a lot at you. Can you talk about this?
Guilt is, it's a really one of the main threads of a cancer, that is associated with the cancer diagnosis for the pet guardian. In terms of, assuming causality, like what we've fed our pets, what we haven't fed our pets, what we've exposed them to. It can go on and on and on. That
how do people get over that?
Well, it's complex. Part of the function of guilt, it's meant to be a fleeting emotion, if you will, to help us correct something that we feel we have done, that we have remorse for. We're not meant to stay in guilt. But one of the other aspects of guilt is it keeps us in our thinking mind rather than our emotional brain. And it just takes up space as a way of disconnecting us from emotion. This is complex in that we could probably do an entire webinar.
But we don't have time. So in 2 sentences, tell me how someone can deal with that feeling.
Okay. Well, the feeling of guilt is typically preceded with a thought, or what we call a cognition. So we would help people check the way they're thinking. I've done this, or I caused this to happen, or my animal's going to die and they're going to die tomorrow. So there's that kind of work, but also that's where veterinary social workers or the APLB also has a resource, a list of counselors who have sensitivity around, terminal or life-threatening diagnoses for companion animals. We have a pet loss grief specialist training program and many graduates, so folks that are available to help people process, again, even the experience prior to loss when there is a life-threatening or a life-limiting diagnosis. But guilt is so complex, and often people need specialized assistance to work that through, or to shift it into an emotion or a way of thinking that's going to serve them more constructively in what they're facing.
Okay, so I want to talk about some good news that's going on. Most of all, in a couple of minutes, I want to answer all your questions. So you could write your questions in the chat. Now would be a good time to begin. I asked you about being a caretaker as well. So can you quickly comment on that before we get to the future? And good things are happening with research and such that I'll talk about next.
Steve, are you asking me about the caretaking?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I think you're the
All
right
right.
person.
Well, I think, you could have 100 companion animals diagnosed on the same day. And as I say, you'll have 100 different trajectories about, for some people, it stops there for them because they don't have the internal or financial or other resources to move forward. But with caregiving, this is where we see inequities, and there are people working, especially in the States, to sort of balance and address inequities in capacities for people to care for their companion animals who are facing health challenges. But caregiving, as you said, is 24/7, and there are so many. If people are working, do they have the capacity for flexibility in terms of coming home or staying at home? One of the main concerns about caregiving is sleep disruption, and that has a myriad of consequences for our emotional and physiological well-being. And there may be conflicts in the family or in partnerships around decision-making about treatment, about who manages tasks, caregiving tasks, and all sorts of different, again, threads that come out of that alone.
Tanya, I see a crystal. I see a cat tree behind you. What I don't see is a crystal ball, but I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball anyway. So, and then Dr. Timmons, I'm going to ask you the same sort of question because you're actually working on this research. And what have we got coming down the road, not 40 years from now, but soon, that is going to make a difference? And I know Base Paws soon is sort of tomorrow with some of the things you've got going.
Yeah, so thanks. We are actually doing research in the areas of feline and canine GI lymphoma. You can actually, if you are a pet owner and your pet has been diagnosed with this, you can contact Base Paws and go to the website. There's a section you can click called Learn and learn about our research. And we will accept samples of pet DNA, either from veterinarians or from pet owners. We call that citizen science. And it helps us understand if there are any genetic links to cancers that are going on. Another area of research that we are actively working on is something called the oral microbiome. So we actually can now sequence the genetic material of all of the organisms in a pet's mouth and develop risk models for a wide variety of diseases. So a lot of our research is looking into that as a very easy predictive tool for disease risk in pets. So really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I'm the guy who hooked Dr. Jan Bellows, veterinary dentist, up with you guys, and he's legendary veterinary dentist. I mean, he literally wrote the book and another book and another book and another book on veterinary dentistry, and he is so impressed with what you're doing, and that matters because what's happening in the pet's mouth has a lot to do with what's happening in the pet. Specifically talking about cancer, Dr. Timmons, we're in the year 2023, I think 2025, not that far off. Are we going to see anything, or are we going to wait till the year 2030? Are those answers going to come from human medicine solely? Talk about where we are.
Well, as far as cancer research, I think what's really cool about Volition is that really we're tackling this from so many different angles. But what's also unique in the pet world, is that there are so many different species. Our biggest thing right now, obviously, we have our test validated for cancer screening in dogs. our biggest, most immediate thing is getting cats out there. We know everyone is just dying to be able to use this in cats as well. We know how important that is. We have not forgotten about our feline friends. And then essentially continuing down the road of cancer monitoring and using that for monitoring during treatment is going to be very big as well, because we do, we have recently done our lymphoma monitoring and working on that validation, and basically showing that, we can pick up early on that a dog is coming out of remission. And so I think that's going to be very important to continue that work in cats as well. As far as down the line, our goal is to, not only just continue with the screening, but hopefully work as an aid in diagnosis as well, and kind of continuing down that genetic route as well. So we know how important all these things are, especially me even being a veterinarian, as well, and knowing how important it is to get down that more diagnostic route. But right now we're focusing on trying to make sure that we are including as well as our feline friends and keeping them in the loop as well, because we don't want to leave them behind.
Dr. Timmons, and thank you for saying that. In human medicine, I believe the thing is, for some types of cancer, some of the time, is treatment, not an effort necessarily to cure, but an effort to live with a good quality of life with cancer. Is the same thing happening for our pets?
Yeah, I think we've hit on this a couple times during the session of there's multiple factors you have to take into account when talking about the pet and the pet family. It's not just the pet and their quality of life, it's the owner's quality of life, it's the financial ability of the family as well. And so, me as a veterinarian, when I approach cancer in general and pets, it's more so giving that spectrum of options and saying, yes, we can go and do all the bells and whistles of CT scans and chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. That's never wrong. And that's going to be our gold standard, technically, therapy. But there's such a range of spectrum as well, where you can do more palliative care, meaning that you're essentially trying to keep the pet comfortable and not necessarily extending their prognosis. I kind of want to touch, actually, while we're talking about that, again, what you and Dr. Butera had kind of talked about in regards to hemangiosarcoma of, well, let's say you do pick it up early. What does that change? For me as a general practitioner veterinarian, that changes a lot of things. When I have a dog coming in with a bleeding hemangiosarcoma, usually the owners come home, they're laying flat on the ground, they're super sick, lethargic, their belly's distended, they rush them into me, and you're making decisions like within minutes, right? Like this is an emergent decision, and there's very little time, as Nina said, for processing. They have to process that they're going to be thinking of the big C word, of guilt, of do I have the financial ability, what's the prognosis, and it's all just very condensed. If we can pick this up earlier, it doesn't even necessarily mean an owner has to go forward with extensive diagnostics if they can't physically or financially do that, but at least gives them more time and know what to prepare for, so that they can emotionally prepare and address that accordingly. So I see it as in a couple ways. Yes, ideally, obviously, as a scientist, as a veterinarian, I would love to pick it up early so I can jump in, get that spleen out, and have it not be an issue anymore. But I know realistically, a lot of owners aren't necessarily going to be able to do that. But at the very least, I can give that owner more time so that they're not making such an emergent decision, because a lot of times they don't know their pet's sick until they're very, very sick. And so that's more so what's key for me.
Does, and this is a question for Dr. Stansfield, does early diagnosis mean better prognosis? It's kind of a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, I'll take that.
So. Yes.
All right, very good. I think we have several questions here, Jessica. And I would be remiss after promising to take people's questions if I didn't do that. So we have them?
We do. We have a couple for you.
And by the way, if you want to add to the list, this would be a good time to do it. Otherwise, you're going to hear me ask more questions until we're done. Jessica, go ahead.
We have a couple. So a lot of them are around the NUQ test. So forgive me, guys, because I am not a scientist, nor am I anything in this. So I'm going to botch some of these questions. So it says, Penny wants to know, is there a UQ in the works for felines? And I think we answered that, but I'm just going to ask it anyway because I want you guys to elaborate on that for her.
Okay, and I'll let Dr. Timmons maybe answer that. Before you do, spell NUQ2 so people understand it literally is NUQ2, but go ahead.
Yeah, this is a NUQ, but we pronounce it NUQ. New, kind of like Mewtwo, like the Pokemon, but NUQ. But so yes, the NUQ test, we are currently working on feline pre-analytics right now. So that is definitely, we want to make sure we're not leaving our feline friends behind. And so that is definitely something we're heavily focusing on at the moment.
Next.
Okay. On that, Penny also asked, she also asked that at what age do you suggest dogs start getting tested with the NUQ test? I'm not
Dr.
doing
Butera?
with that one. Thank God that's my last one with that one, I think.
The initial answer to that question, older dogs, 7 years and older, the predisposition for cancer death is close to 50% of those dogs that start getting up to around 8, 9, 10 years of age. So starting with 7 and older, and then all your predisposed breeds, of which we've mentioned a number of them here, start as early as 4 years of age. Again, we're trying to pick it up early so that we can have a better quality of life with our beloved pets.
And will you be able to better answer that question in, say, 5 years when you have data?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely, Steve.
Okay. Jessica?
Cynthia asked, Cynthia asked, will these tests, and I'm just going to say these because you guys talked about a couple of them, but she's asked, will these tests be able to test dogs for Cushing's disease too?
Dr. Butera, are you working on something for Cushing's? And actually, I don't know what Base Paws is thinking about. Maybe there's but Dr. Butera, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'll let you, what Becca and I have both been speaking about right now are our cancer detection tests and our cancer monitoring tests. We actually have a biomarker that we're working on now from the human side of volition, which we're working with our criticalist, Dr. Justin Hines at Texas A&M, and we're actually beginning to work on sepsis and other non-cancerous diseases, of which Cushing's and Addisonian disease could be part of that whole study. So stay tuned on that. We're starting active studies in a number of academic institutions on that.
And for people who don't know, could you give like a one sentence? Oh, I like our special guest I see there, Tanya. Can you give a one sentence description? What is Cushing's? What is Addison's at a very basic?
Go ahead, Beck. I'll let you go ahead and answer that. You're practicing right now.
The difference between Addison's and Cushing's, is that what you're saying? So
yeah.
So essentially, Cushing's disease is where the most basic way I explain is where the body produces too much steroid hormone, internal steroid hormone like cortisol. So sometimes the dog can look like a little pot-bellied in appearance. They can have a little bit of losing fur. They can be peeing and drinking a lot. They'll have a ravenous appetite. So imagine if you were on a really high dose of steroids, how you'd feel. And that's kind of how they look. Addison's disease is essentially the exact opposite. Their body, right. Their body does not produce it well. So their body just doesn't handle stressful situations well. So sometimes they'll have like intermittent chronic vomiting or diarrhea. Sometimes they'll just present on emergency because their electrolytes are so messed up because they had no steroid hormone to help regulate that. And then we have to essentially stabilize them. They can almost look like they're in anaphylaxis or shock or something, like they just come in and completely flat out. And so, but essentially they're exact opposite diseases.
For dogs, aside from cancer, Tanya, is there something that Base Paws is working on that we should all know about that you can tell us about? Well, you and your very special guest can tell us about.
Base Paws just recently launched a canine DNA test, and I think we have almost 280 markers in our test. And we're exploring and reviewing research, peer-reviewed published research, quite frequently to determine if there are any new and emerging markers that we should add to the list. There's a lot of common conditions aside, we're not there yet in research for cancers with direct links to specific genetic mutations. That's more complex, but there are conditions like dilated cardiomyopathy that pets can, especially dogs, can be at high risk for based on genetic mutations that are actually early detection of that can add many years to a dog's life with appropriate medical management. So happy to be helping lead the way in an early detection for that.
Indeed. Jessica, any more?
Oh yeah, we got a couple really good ones that I would like to ask before we end the call. And Amy, whoever you are, I would like to be your friend because you've got some seriously great questions, sister. So
Hi, Amy.
she does. She's got some. So here's two really good ones, and this kind of gets everybody involved in it on their group. Are canine cancers truly more genetic, or are they becoming more environmental? And this is a great question because this is a thing that a lot of parents are having a problem. Is this also has to do with how pet owners deal with the guilt factor? Is this still more genetics, or is it environmental bigger play now in the roles, which I think is amazing. I saw Rebecca's hand go right up. Good friend. I knew yours would go up, but I think that's a great question because I hear that often with pet parents.
Whose hand went up? I didn't see.
Dr. Timmons. Sorry.
Okay. You're pointing this way and she's that way. On
I know. She's up here for
Dr.
me.
Timmons.
All the mirroring.
Yeah, it's the Brady Bunch for me right now,
I think that, the way I try to tell them is right now, we know that there's a lot of genetic factors at play. We know and we can definitely identify certain genetic factors. We can identify certain hormonal issues. I know we know for sure that definitely, an intact female dog is going to be at much higher risk for mammary cancer, for instance. So there are ways we can prevent that by spaying them at certain ages to reduce that risk, right? So we know that there's definitely hormonal genetic factors. As far as environmental, I think there's still a lot of research that still has to be done. And I think one thing I try to remind owners too is that cancer is really a broad term for so many diseases. And I think everyone wants to find one reason why their pet gets cancer and one factor why they want to know, what did I do wrong? That's the most common thing I hear from pet owners when I tell them I'm concerned about cancer in their pet. They say, what did I do wrong? And you didn't do anything wrong. It's the thing is when it comes down to it, pets are getting older, they're living a lot longer. And so eventually something has to take the body, is the way I describe it, whether that's an organ not working anymore, or whether that's unfortunately those cells growing abnormally and turning into something like cancer, just like we see in humans. And I think, when we see it in really young animals, that's when we can say, especially like golden retrievers and boxers, know that these breeds are genetically predisposed to certain cancers. And that's why we probably see them more frequently when they're younger. But I think the guilt is definitely something that's hard on owners. And I try to remind owners a lot of the times it's not anything that you did wrong.
Good answer. What I've been taught is that there are essentially three factors, simply put. Our dogs are living longer than ever before. Cancer is greatly a disease of older mammals, including humans and dogs. The environment they live in, they share the same environment that we do. What those factors are, as you mentioned, to some extent, great extent, remain a mystery, as well as genetic predispositions, both genetic within breed, but also something we haven't talked about that maybe Dr. Timmons, you can mention briefly because we're running out of time, and that is family genetics too.
Yeah, and so there are definitely inheritable traits that you can get. And so we do know that, one big thing we say too, as far as our cancer screening test, if that animal has, a brother or sister or parent that we know had like hemangiosarcoma or lymphoma, those genes can be passed down to future generations, just like we see with our parents. If my mom, had the BRCA gene or had breast cancer or whatnot, I'm going to be at higher risk for that, right? So I think that's, it's not, you're right, it's not necessarily just breed predisposition, but there's definitely a heritability there as well.
Yeah, but here's the problem, and it's a problem Trisha wants us all to have, and that is to adopt dogs. All of you want us to have that, right? But we have no idea anything about the litter mates or the parents of that dog. For most people, the doctor, I just saw my doctor today. He can ask me, well, your grandparents, tell me about what their health was like. Your great-grandparents. Oh, that one I can't answer too well. But I can go back, many people can, to their parents for sure, their siblings, and
Mhm.
probably their parents and grandparents, and can't do that with all our dogs, unfortunately. And that's part of an issue too that is different with dogs. Jessica, I want to sneak in another question or two if we can, real fast.
We're going to have one, but I just want to let everybody know that I actually I've written all your questions down, and I will get answers for all of you, and we will put them up on our website or our Facebook page somewhere. I'll make sure that you guys get the answers. So,
And where do they go for it? What Facebook page, which website?
Moose's March, of course, but I'll get that to you at the end because I need to give you this. So the
Okay.
next one is where is it? Oh, I gotta find it. Where'd it go? They're asking questions so fast. One of the questions was, and I'm just going to paraphrase it because I can't find it fast enough. They want to know if when they find out that their dog has cancer, where do they find an oncologist? And that's a great question because that is a question that a lot of people do ask because a lot of people don't know where to go. Where's the next steps of what to do
Sure.
when their dog's been diagnosed? And that's
Dr. Stansfield.
sorry.
Yeah, well, I think your general practitioner will very often be able to refer you to the right oncologist, the one that they're most familiar with and use most of the time. So your GP is going to be your main resource in finding another oncologist. And if that doesn't work, then you cast around to your universities or your local specialty hospitals. But I think your GP is just going to have the answer for you.
Yeah, a lot of I'm just going to say this though, Doctor. A lot of our general practitioners here do not recommend them out. That's why we're asking that, and that's why the question's being asked. Yeah, a lot of our general practitioners do not recommend people out, and that's why it gets thrown up in the Facebook groups and stuff like that. I see it very, very commonly that it's in a lot of the groups. So I know that's why it's being asked.
Okay,
Dr. Butera.
Yeah, Jess, there may be a quick reason for that. There's only 450 veterinary oncologists in the United States.
There you go.
And there are 6 million dogs that develop cancer every year.
There's a good answer.
The ratio is really quite broad, and consequently, a lot of them can't get in to see them.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. The other thing is, right, in a timely manner, it's hard to get in sometimes to see a general practitioner now.
Yeah,
it is.
Timely matter, which is something I talk about at conferences. And the veterinary industry is working to change that. One could have a whole different discussion about that issue. But the reality is getting in to see a specialist can be even more difficult, just like it is in human medicine. Jessica, I think we should kind of cut it off now because we're over time.
Yes, it is. So, yes, we go ahead. I'll let you wrap up, and then I'm going to say a couple things, and I'll let Trisha say something.
Oh, okay. I want to thank all my panelists, all the panel. You're not mine. I take no responsibility. All the panelists that are here, I am grateful for your time. My hope is that we help some of you, maybe many of you, in one way, shape, or form. I am grateful to meet you all, and thank you for your expertise. Trisha, thank you for allowing me to be here. And I just heard you want to say something?
I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight, for all the participants, as well as all the panelists. You all are my heart, and I thank you. This is in Moose's honor. And I would just, if you have a dog who's been diagnosed with cancer, if you have anything, know that there is hope out there. And what we're going to be doing is working towards helping you and spreading the word and educating and really making sure and talking about early detection. And I just want to thank everyone for being here, and go to moosesmarch.com. I'm going to let Jessica wrap it up because I'm getting emotional here.
Oh, yeah. No tears tonight. So we want to thank everybody. And I do have a list of questions. I will make sure that everybody that they were asked of will give you the proper answer. So give me a day or so. You will find them on our Facebook page, Moose's March. I'll make sure that they're highlighted and brought out. And thank you, everybody, for coming, and keep an eye out on our Facebook page. We'll do this again, and you'll get an email thanking you. So hopefully we'll see you guys again. So thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.